This is Platemark with me, Ann Schaefer. I'm an independent curator who focuses on prints, drawings, and photographs, though prints are my special secret love, not so secret. Platemark is a podcast about prints and the printmaking ecosystem. In this series, Series 3, I'm talking with people who occupy various roles in the ecosystem. And if you've been following along, you know how much I love talking to printers. Today's guest is Jonathan Higgins, who is the founder of Manneken Press in Bloomington, Illinois. We talk about all sorts of things, including his early interest in ceramics. We talk about him and Randy Hemminghaus banding together in New York to start Galamander Press. We also talk about the founding of Manneken Press and the move to Bloomington, and we talk about favorite projects and artists that he works with, including Jill Moser, Jason Karolak, and Rupert Dees, and a bunch of other people. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. All right, housekeeping. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images that Jonathan and I talk about will be over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. Also over there you can leave me a message, you can leave a review, and you can also hit support and donate and help me keep the lights on. I think that's it. Let's get rolling. Jonathan, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for coming on Platemark.
Thanks for having me.
We've been talking about this for a while, so it's great. We finally got our ducks in a row, and here you are.
Yeah.
Can you introduce yourself, everybody?
Yeah, I'm Jonathan Higgins. Well, I'm the director and owner, master printer, and pretty much everything of Manneken Press, which I started in 2000.
And where are you located?
Located in Bloomington, Illinois, hotbed of artistic production.
Are you it?
There's an art community here, and the reason we live here is because my wife, Sarah Smelser, is an art educator, and she teaches printmaking at Illinois State University. So we moved here because of her job. But interestingly, I'm not the only publishing press in this community. There's one connected to the university called Normal Editions Workshop, and they're coming up on their 50th anniversary, I think.
Is that right?
And they kind of fly a little bit under the radar. And their program is very much tied to the academic program at the art department. But they do some interesting things. Yeah.
Is Sarah the head of that?
No, they're their own kind of entity.
Oh, okay.
They have a director and a printer, and her students do work with the artists on their print projects. So it's very much it's kind of part of the educational curriculum.
Well, that's cool. And Sarah's also an artist.
She's an artist too, and sort of co-founder. I mean, she's technically the co-owner, but she's not interested in what I do. She's a teacher. Well, I mean, she's not interested in the print publishing, or this is my thing. This is my full-time job. This is what I do. When she is not teaching or during the summers, she just wants to make her own work, and so this is pretty much my domain. But I would not have been able to have done this, and got it started into where it is, without her support in various ways. So.
Yes, many of us have supportive spouses, don't we?
Yeah. I think about that, and also think about if I had stayed in New York City, I don't think I would have been able to have done this the way that I have been doing it, because overhead is low here. So, that's part of my strategy in starting the Manneken Press and wanting to focus on publishing and not doing contract printing. It was, keep costs low.
All right. Well, so before we hit the New York part of your story, let's go back. You are from California somewhere. I'm not sure where. Where?
Well, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in Berkeley during the 60s and 70s. Tumultuous, interesting time there. Yeah, I became, interested in art there. I was sort of vaguely aware of Crown Point Press when I was in my teens. But yeah, there were, the Bay Area is, a great and vibrant place. And I actually grew up near the UC Berkeley campus. And we used to go to the UC Berkeley Art Museum, which has now moved to a different building, but the building there, I think it was maybe built in the late 60s or something. It's very kind of like cement, kind of brutalist structure, but they had these ramps. The entrance was sort of this pathway, and then there were these ramps that kind of angled up, and we used to skateboard on those ramps. But the entry to the museum was free, so I would go in there sometimes, and they had a room up at the top that was a permanent installation of Hans Hofmann paintings. And I used to remember just going in there and just kind of being like overwhelmed and kind of marveling and kind of being struck, but not quite understanding, you know. But so that's sort of like, was an experience I remember there. But also there was a lot of art and craft things going on at that time. And I became really interested in ceramics and pottery. My high school had a ceramic studio, and I learned to throw the wheel, and I thought, okay, I want to be a potter. So I kind of started off with that interest. And then when I went to a school called Humboldt State University, which is in the far northwestern corner of California. Really beautiful coastal redwoods, fog, kind of very Pacific Northwest sort of feeling. They had a great ceramics program, and so I started doing that. But of course, it's a university art program, so you're studying art history and all this, all the other things. And I was very interested in vessel forms, not necessarily like functional pottery, but I was serious enough about it that after my sophomore year, I withdrew from school and I went to Japan. 'Cause I was very enamored with historical Japanese ceramics. And I did a self-guided tour of pottery villages through Japan, which was very interesting and adventurous and, a lot of fun. And I traveled other places too. But when I got back, I returned to school, the following year, and my work changed. And I started doing less sort of vessel-oriented and more interested in surface decoration and imagery. So I was throwing these large platters and then kind of painting and carving and imagery. And then I decided at some point, maybe I should take a lithography class to help develop my two-dimensional imagery. So that was my entry into printmaking.
Way to start with the hard stuff.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. Once I started doing lithography, it was like I was hooked, and I just kind of dropped doing ceramics. But I thought one of the things that made sense to me, I don't know if it makes sense to other people, but I always thought that there was a sort of a correlation in an odd way between ceramics and printmaking, in that there's like a transformational aspect where, with ceramics, you're working with basically like mud, and it's very wet and, pliable, and then it dries and it becomes very brittle, and then you glaze it and you fire it and it becomes like rock or glass and very durable and vitreous. And then, with printmaking, you're working on a matrix. You're not working directly on a piece of paper or, a canvas or something. And then you're printing that, and then the transformation comes in the printing, and then the mirror image from what you've been working on. And somehow I think that's maybe why I was drawn to lithography. Somehow that idea just kind of made sense to me.
You're not the first person to talk about ceramics at all, actually, which honestly, before I did the podcast, it hadn't really occurred to me. But I think the through line is that you work on something, but you don't know what it's going to be until you pull it out of the kiln.
Yeah.
Or out of the press.
It has a big, part of the determining the final, outcome.
Well, so litho isn't easy, but did you do other kinds of things in your workshop? I think you do everything.
Well, nowadays I don't do lithography.
Oh, okay.
At Manneken Press, I pretty much do intaglio and relief and monotype.
Okay.
And for a long time I was doing photogravure, but I've kind of phased that out for various reasons. So
I'm sort of not obsessed with photogravure, but I feel like it seems to be having this moment, and a lot of people talk about wanting to do it and everything. What made you stop?
It's always been, it's a finicky process. So it's always been a little bit of a pain in the butt. to do it, because sometimes you have to make a play and you have to do it over. You have to go back 4 steps and figure out what you did wrong, or what environmental conditions in your studio were different from the last time you did it, and all that stuff. And then there were a couple of like product changes with the gelatin tissue that you use, and the stuff that's available now. I just was always felt more difficult for me to work with. The main reason is I developed a chemical sensitivity to alcohol. So, and my studio isn't the best ventilated. So it was weird. It was like just when COVID started, I was working on a photogravure project, and I was going home on my bike, and I started feeling that weird kind of like flu, kind of like fever thing. And I was like, oh God, I've got COVID. So then I got home, took my temperature. I had, low temperature, but then I isolated in my basement for 2 weeks. And then, I was fine. And then I went back to the studio and started working on it again. And the same thing happened. I was like, okay, something's going on here. So anyway, I just decided that it's not something that I am interested. Whereas, in the first, I thought it was kind of like the holy grail of intaglio printmaking, and, it was sort of endlessly fascinating. But I don't know. I just decided that that's not what I want to do anymore.
Well, well done. I think that there is a tendency on my part to romanticize the entire enterprise. And people talk about, developing non-toxic this, that, and the other, whatever, safety, blah, blah, blah. But I think that we haven't made it really, really, really clear that this stuff can really harm your health. And you have to know what you're doing. And, kids don't try this at home kind of a thing. Like, it's serious.
Yes. And, I always take precaution about always wearing gloves. But somehow, alcohol, like the denatured alcohol kind of like never seemed like that serious to me. And the other problem is that because you're working with the gelatin, you have to keep the room humidified. So it's hard to have ventilation because you'd be sucking out the humidity that you're working hard to maintain, at a particular level. So I figure, I've reached the age where I just, I only want to do what I want to do. So that's what I'm doing.
Before I let you turn away from the topic of photogravure, I had Lothar Osterberg.
Yeah, he's the one who taught me initially.
Yeah. Well, not surprising. He seems to be the man. Sorry to whoever else is the man and woman. I don't know. Sorry. Reach out. Let me know. I'm still confused about how hardy the hardened gelatin is in terms of numbers of time through the press. Is it like, can you get a bazillion impressions off of a photogravure plate?
Well, you're not. I mean, you're using the gelatin to etch through to the plate.
Oh.
So then once the plate is etched, it's like, it's an etched.
It's just, I don't know why I keep thinking the gelatin is still there in the end. I don't know what my problem is. I cannot get that in my head.
No, that's you. When you finish etching, you wash it off. And,
okay. I think I said the same thing to Lothar. I'm going to have to go back and listen. All right. So you remember the moment it was in the lithography class, but when do you turn and say to yourself, I'm going to go find a job in a print shop and I'm going to make a living at this thing?
What happened was, after I finished my bachelor's degree, I moved back to the Bay Area and quickly realized that having a BA in art doesn't really qualify you to do anything or like be anything. Right. So, but I had to, support myself. So I actually got a 9-to-5 job at an insurance brokerage. A friend of mine worked there, and it was just like, I did that for a couple of years. And it was actually the only time in my entire life that I've ever had like a regular 9-to-5 job and paid vacation and all that kind of stuff. But it was really like soul crushing. It was so exactly the opposite of what I wanted to be doing. And it was actually a good motivator because I knew that I couldn't, I wasn't cut out to work in an office. And so, I found actually very near to where I worked, there's a junior college that had a really nice print studio. And I went there, and at that time, California community colleges were very inexpensive. So you could take a class for $15 a semester.
What?
Yeah, it's $5 a credit.
Wow.
So I signed up for 2 classes. So I'd go to, like, Monday through Friday, I'd go to work 9 to 5. I'd take an hour break for dinner, and then I'd go from 6 to 9 and work in the print studio at the junior college. And it was they actually had a big brand press and gigantic stone too. It was really fun to work there. But there was a community, it kind of provided me with a community of artists, and everybody just kept taking the same class over and over. And you didn't have to be working toward a degree. So basically people were signing up to use it as their studio. So that was good. And then there were 2 teachers there, a guy named Charlie Chavez and Betty Friedman, who I'm still in touch with. And Betty put 2 opportunities in front of me, one of which was, she was also a papermaker, printmaker and papermaker. And she was making paper for a project that Crown Point Press was doing with John Cage. So she had heard that they were interviewing printers. So I got an interview. I didn't get the job, but that was when I first kind of started thinking like, oh, well, maybe this could be something, that I would be interested in doing. But I got to meet John Cage, which was a thrill. The other one was a little while later, she had somebody in her studio building, who was a printmaker and was looking for an assistant to help him print his editions. I was an artist named David Smith Harrison, and I started working for him on the weekends. So I was doing like the 9 to 5 and the junior college thing Monday through Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday I was working for David Smith Harrison, and he was an etcher, and then he was printing for another artist named Trevor Southey. And their work was very similar. It was very kind of tight, just like beautiful draftsmanship. And David's work, he would make a very detailed rendering of something, like a palm tree or a lemon tree or a building or something, and then overlay that with sort of looser another image. It was interesting work, but that's where I really first learned how to print and etching. I'd taken an etching class in college, but I just somehow didn't feel natural to me or something, whereas lithography did. But so that's where I kind of learned that skill. And then there was another artist that he kind of would farm me out to, Chad Buck. And those 2 guys, Trevor and Chad, are both deceased. David is still living, but I'm not sure. I lost touch with him somewhere along the way. But one interesting little factoid about them was that they were all gay Mormon printmakers. So I think Trevor had been their teacher at BYU. He was actually from a white Zimbabwean who'd grown up in Zimbabwe, moved to England, and then moved to the States, and ended up teaching at BYU. And then the 3 of them decided that, this was like, early 80s, and decided that they needed to go to San Francisco, which was a more friendly climate for gay men in particular. But yeah, it was interesting. It just this kind of being in that milieu. But I also decided that, I was kind of looking ahead to graduate school. So I was working at the junior college, trying to put together a coherent portfolio to apply to good schools with. And 80s, you kept hearing about all these things coming out of New York and the East Village scene and all that kind of stuff. And so that sounded really exciting. So I applied to NYU, and I applied to the San Francisco Art Institute because I also, I've had a toehold in the Bay Area, and, that was a good program too, but I opted to go to NYU. So I moved to New York in 1989 to study at NYU with Krishna Reddy.
Oh.
But one of the first stops I made, because I knew that I had to have some income. So I was looking to find some printing work, and I knew about the printmaking workshop. And so one of the first stops I made was to go to there, and I met with Bob Blackburn, who was very gracious, and we had a long conversation, and I had, my printer's proofs from the printing I had done with those 3 artists in California, and but he ended up saying he didn't have any work for me then, but there was this person you should go see, Kathy Caraccio, and she might have some work. So I ended up, going to meet with Kathy, and she had just gotten a big project, and this was 89. It was, just Glasnost and the Berlin Wall had come down, and all the New York galleries were flocking to Russia to try to find Russian artists for their,
Oh God, I'd forgotten that.
So Brodsky and Utkin, there's a pair of Russian artists who were working collaboratively. And Kathy had just gotten a big portfolio project published by Ronald Feldman Gallery. And it had, 30 or something, large etchings and some smaller ones too. And they were all these sort of fascinating, sort of architectural, but really dreamy. They had been trained as architects, but I think that they were stuck designing Soviet-era block housing and things like that. And so for their creative outlet, they would enter these international competitions where I think they would just offer a theme. There would be a theme, and you're supposed to design something based around that theme. And then, so they would basically produce their projects as etchings. So over the years, they had kind of amassed a big pile of plates.
Oh my gosh.
And so Ronald Feldman Gallery was publishing it. And yeah, they were beautiful. They were, beautifully drawn, mostly line etching, and it had handwritten script in English, usually. But they had all, written it backwards into the plate. Yeah, you can go online and search, and these prints come up. I have a few of them up in my portfolio behind me. But I started doing that, and it felt really great. I was like, oh, I can make a living doing this.
Well, so where were you printing? At Kathy's?
At Kathy's. She had a studio on the Bowery. So I was doing that, doing the program at NYU. And then there was another printer I worked for, Pat Branstad. She had a press called Aero Press, which I think is where Felix Harlan and Carol Weaver had started before they opened their own studio. But when I worked for her, she had closed Aero Press, and she was the master printer for River House Editions in Colorado. So she would go out to Colorado and make plates with the artists and proofing to BATs, and then bring it all back to New York. And she had a studio in Tribeca. It was all printed there. So it was really it was like a beehive. I was working on one project, and there was another, there were probably 6 or 8 different printers working there at a time.
Oh my gosh.
And my project there was another pair of Russian artists, Komar and Melaman.
Oh, right.
A couple of large format etchings. And then after I finished at NYU, I just continued trying to find freelance printing around the city, and I was doing art handling. I had kind of a rotation. I'd work at the Guggenheim during their exhibition changeovers, and then the American Craft Museum, which is now, I guess, Museum of Art and Design, and then Reader's Digest, their art collection up in Pleasantville, the north of the city.
Huh.
Back before they sold their collection off, well, the best parts of it.
Right.
So I'd be doing that, and then one of the things I did when I was just finishing at NYU, the Brooklyn Museum used to have these contemporary print exhibitions every couple of years. So there was one of these exhibitions that had come up when I was still at NYU, and I went around and looked. It was a great exhibition, but I would go, look around at each label, and I took a note of, which press and if they were located in New York. And I wrote that down, and this was pre-internet, of course. So I researched, how to contact these places, and have typed, on a typewriter and a letter, and was applying for work. And the one place that replied was Vinyl Haven Press in Maine. And so, I went up, and a guy named Randy Hemminghaus hired me to come up and to print an edition. It was a small edition of a Robert Indiana print, edition of 100, that was a benefit for the Museum of Modern Art print department. So I was supposed to go up for 2 weeks and do this print. And so I did, and then turned out Randy had been working on another project with another Russian artist, Grisha Bruskin. And it was a big project that had, 6, multiple plate color etchings. And Pat Nick, the woman who ran Vinyl Haven, she had the print workshop up on Vinyl Haven Island. She had grown up there and had a house there, but she also had a loft in Soho. And she was one of the early members of the IFPDA, I think. And so she would, produce these prints during the summer, and then she'd bring them all down in the fall for the IFPDA fair. So Randy wasn't going to make it in time, so she asked me to stay on. And so I ended up staying like for 6 weeks that summer, helping do the rest of that printing. And Randy and I got on really well, became friends. We're both, passionate about printmaking. And so for the next 5 years, 5 summers, the workshop only operated during the summers, but Pat would hire the two of us to come up, and we were the printers for Vinyl Haven Press. So we worked one summer with Alison Sarr on one of her first print projects, and then she came back the following summer, worked with her again. Jose Badia, who had just come over from Cuba at that point, and Mel Chin was another of the artists, and Peter Saul. So those were the artists that I worked with there. And then in the interim, Randy, who also lived in New York, he and I decided that we should open our own press in New York.
Uh-huh.
So we did, and we rented a space at 526 West 26th Street, which is it was like the first kind of anchor art building in Chelsea. It was just when Chelsea was becoming, like the art galleries were moving over there. What is 94, I think. And so, we set up a studio and we're kind of ran it together for 5 years. It was a struggle, but we had a lot of passion and knowledge and energy, but we didn't really have a clear vision of like what we wanted to do, or we're kind of naive about business, stuff.
What was the name of the press?
It was called Galamander Press.
Galamander, okay.
And I think that Randy he still does stuff occasionally under the imprint of Galamander Press.
Okay.
Although I saw that he lives in Jersey City, and I saw that just last week he has listed our old Charles Brand Press.
Oh.
So I don't know if he's stopping, doing that or.
Uh-oh.
But so we were piecing it together with the projects that we could do at Galamander, and then do the art handling. And then at one point, Randy got a job at Rutgers, at the Rutgers Center for Innovative Print and Paper, which later became the Brodsky Center, and is no longer at Rutgers. But he did that. He was like a replacement for 1 year. And he ended up staying and doing that I think he's still there, actually, at Rutgers. And at one point, he was just sort of overwhelmed with the amount of work that was being thrown at him. He asked them to hire me. So Judith Brodsky hired me. So both of us at one point, were working full-time down there, and then, coming back and trying to do stuff at Galamander Press in the evenings. And then around the same time is when I met Sarah.
Uh-huh.
And she was a grad student at University of Iowa, and we met at Bob Blackburn's.
Oh.
She was coming through on a tour with her mom, and I was working there on a project. This was just before we had our studio set up. So I was doing an editioning project there, like renting the press. She was looking at graduate programs, and her mom said, like, that's a nice-looking young man. Why don't you go talk to him?
Oh, no, she did not.
So I was telling her, about my experience at NYU, and she ended up going to University of Iowa. But we stayed in touch, and anyway, by the time we had kind of like the end of Galamander Press time, which was like 1999 maybe, we decided we were going to get married, and she was applying for teaching positions, and the idea was going to be that I would move to be with her wherever she ended up with a full-time tenure-track position, which after a couple of years of, like 1 year positions, sabbatical replacement positions and stuff, she ended up with a job at West Virginia University in 1999. So we got married in 98 and then moved down to Morgantown, West Virginia. And that's where I started Manneken Press, actually, in 2000. Basically, Randy and I split up equipment and prints and stuff from Galamander, and I moved down there and spent, like 6 or 8 months just sort of getting a studio outfitted and equipped, and started having artists come. And my first published project was done there in 2000, and which reminds me that 25 years next year.
Oh my gosh.
It's been a while.
It has been a while.
But again, that was, low overhead. I actually did not have to pay rent.
Whoa, wow.
There, we were in a building that was it used to be like a printing plant for the local newspaper. And it was right in the middle of town, and they had moved to a new facility, and they still owned the building and just let people use it. So the Boys and Girls Club was upstairs. I had this huge, gigantic space. I mean, I have a pretty good space here now, but this place was like 3 times. It was just gigantic, and it had a whole bank of windows, and it was beautiful. I only used about, a quarter of it.
Oh, wow.
But they just they didn't really care, about paying rent. So that was very helpful in getting established.
The beginning, yeah.
Yeah. But then summer 2000, Sarah and I were both artists in residence at the Frans Mazereel Center in Belgium. And so by that time we had ordered the press from Takach, and it was going to come at the end of the summer when we returned. So we were trying to think of a name, for, what are we going to call this? And then, of course, in Brussels, there's the statue of the Manneken Press, the little boy peeing. And so we started off as kind of a joke, Manneken Press, Manneken Press, haha. But it kind of stuck. And so that's what we decided to over a beer in Belgium near the
Manneken piece.
Yeah.
This may be unknown to you, but when I was 6 and 7, we lived in Brussels. My dad got transferred there for his job, and we used to, as a little kid, my brothers were older than me, but we'd be running around the Grand Place, and we'd run over because it's just around the corner from, go titter at the little boy peeing, and the fountain is the pee, So
I actually have a little shrine. I have 2 antique postcards of the Manneken Press. I have a solid brass statuette.
Nice.
And then also an old-fashioned seltzer dispenser with the Manneken Press, and it squirts out of where you might imagine it squirts out of.
As I recall, and tell me if I'm wrong, the story was that some nobleman's son ran away, got lost in the woods or whatever, and he declared that however we find him, we will memorialize him in that position, and they found him peeing.
I have no idea.
That's my memory.
There was a children's book that we had when our kids were little, and it was called Manneken Press, the Boy Who Peed on a War. And it was sort of this, apocryphal story about, I don't know. But it was different from that one. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know the origins.
Oh, yeah. I think somebody double check me on that one.
I thought that there was something about that it was once maybe this was had to do with the war thing, that it was the only source of water during a siege. It's in the Middle Ages or something.
God, jeez. Here, little ones, drink from the boy's penis.
So
nice.
that was how Manneken Press started. Yeah, so from the beginning, I did not want to do contract printing. I wanted to focus on publishing and working with artists that I thought should be making prints. And actually, part of the inspiration for that was at Galamander, we had a project. We were doing a lot of contract printing, and one of them was for a portfolio. There was these 2 women who were publishing this project. Ended up being called the 20 by 15 portfolio. And it was just a group of, I think, 6 or 7 Brooklyn-based artists who were, I don't even know if they were mid-career, but they were young artists who made good work, and they were publishing this portfolio. So we did a lot of, we did most of the plate making and editioning for that project, although we were never acknowledged for our significant contributions, but that's a story for another time. At that time, it seemed like all the print publishers were doing, there was a usual suspects kind of mentality. So everybody was doing Frank Stella, Jasper Johns, Rosenquist, Rauschenberg. And, I understand that, economically, there are reasons for doing that, and other reasons too. And then for a while, everybody had to do Kiki Smith print. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but it just made me realize that there was a lot of room for a publisher to, be doing interesting work with, with other artists and to try to bring other artists to light. So that made me think, okay, that's going to be like my niche. And it's sort of what I've been trying to do for the last 25 years.
So meaning you like to be the curator of your own?
Yes.
Stable.
Yeah, I think of Manneken Press and this kind of project that is Manneken Press is sort of like an extended curatorial project.
Huh.
Just keeps kind of going into the future. And it will end at some point. But.
Is there a core, besides doing people who need attention that aren't getting attention, is there a sort of an artist type that you look for?
The first couple of artists were people I'd worked with at Galamander Press. So they were friends. Rupert Deese was one artist I did a number of projects with. And another artist named Ted Kincaid, who lives in Dallas. We first met because Randy and I had taken a little teeny ad, a business card size ad in Art in America. We had a little extra budget that month and decided we should do an ad. And Ted Kincaid responded to the ad and been working with him ever since.
Wow.
So they were the first artists. And so I started with this small, group. And the idea was to kind of like slowly grow out larger. I've continued to do that. I actually did a number of projects over the years with Ted and Rupert. Yeah, the main criteria is there something about, this artist's work that grabs me? That's the main thing. I really have to respond to the artist's work. And also then the second part of that is, can I see this artist's work as a print? And sometimes those happen simultaneously. Other times, I'll see an artist and an artist's work and then kind of like think on it for a few weeks or a few months or a few years and let things percolate, and I'll come up with an idea of, like how I might approach a print project with an artist. And actually I have a list pinned to my wall over here of artists that I want to work with.
Uh-huh.
So, and there are a number of them are crossed out. I think I started that list maybe a couple of years ago, but about half of them are checked off.
Nice.
So sometimes it happens like that. Like there's research. Oftentimes I'll find people be introduced to somebody's work on Instagram, because there's not it's like no gallery. Well, there's some galleries here, but there's no galleries in Bloomington. Chicago, when I go to New York or whatever. Yeah, through social media, you see a lot of artwork. For instance, Matt McGee, who's an artist I started working with in 2019, I think. And he is someone whose work I was seeing on Instagram and liked, and I would like it. And he would like some things that I, was putting on my Instagram. And so he was in the back of my mind, like, oh yeah, this could be, an interesting artist to work with. And then one day he just called me up and said, I really like what you're doing and I'm interested in working with you. And
wow.
I said, well, I really like what you're doing and I'm interested in working with you. So, but it happened to be COVID times. The idea of him coming here was out of the question. So I said, well, we can do something, but we have to figure out a way to do it remotely. So we ended up talking about what he wanted to do or what was possible. We settled on a size, so I prepared plates with hard ground, boxed them up with an etching needle, and mailed them to him in Phoenix, where he lives. He worked on them and then sent them back to me. I etched them. They're kind of simple prints. They were just single color aqua tints. So we released that project in 2020, and he came to, let's see, was it 20? I guess maybe it wasn't until 21. It was the first Expo Chicago after COVID, and that's where we first met. I had his prints hanging there on the wall. But we talked a lot on the phone.
Sure.
And it was interesting because I felt like it freed me up to figure out different ways to work with an artist. And it doesn't have to be that they come here. And I did another remote project with Judy Ledgerwood during COVID, and that was a monotype project because we had done some editions earlier in 2014, and then I'd wanted her to come back and do some monotypes. And so we had it all scheduled, and then COVID hit. And she said, "Oh, well, I guess I can't come." And I said, "Oh, well, let's figure this out. We can make it work." I was kind of panicking because I was like, what am I going to do? I can't have artists, come to the studio. So I proposed that she work with watercolor. So I sent her, plates that I had prepared, and then she worked on them in her studio with watercolor. I sent them with silicone release paper, so she wrapped them up carefully and shipped them back to me, and then I would print them here. We did that sort of back and forth over about a 6 or 7 month period, and she made about 30 monotypes. So.
Wow.
So those things kind of, I don't know, it seemed to like open some doors to, there are myriad ways that you can work with an artist on these projects. And the main tripping point is that it extends the time. Right. You can get a lot of work done with an artist here in the studio being present, but things can extend over months or years if you're doing it all by mail, FaceTime, or what have you.
Wait, can I ask you about monotypes before you move on?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've talked about monotypes on the pod, and I think most people probably assume, like I assume, that you have to be present with the press as you are creating on whatever the support is, where you're squidging around the ink. But can you tell us how does this really work? How does that work?
I started doing watercolor monotype, just experimenting with it with my own work. I think Jim Stroud is the one who first told me about it from Center Street Studio in Boston. But you can work using watercolor on a prepared plate. So you can either sand it, like with a real fine sander, to create like a tooth, sort of like a litho plate, so that water-based media will sit, evenly on the surface and not kind of beat up like it would on a smooth surface.
This is a piece of copper?
No, a piece of plexi.
Oh, plexi. Okay.
You probably could do it on copper too, but the other way to do it is then to take just the smooth, unsanded plexi sheet, and you can buff in a thin layer of gum arabic, and then the watercolor kind of sits on that, and then that also helps with the transfer. But in both cases, you need to wait for the watercolor to dry completely. So, in my experiments here with watercolor monotype, I'd prepare the plate, I'd do, my painting with watercolor, let it sit overnight, come back the next day and use damp paper, and then the pressure of the press and the dampness of the paper will reactivate the watercolor, and it'll transfer.
How wet are we talking?
Well, the way Jim showed me was very, very wet. But, water was like pouring off of the press bed and stuff. But I actually, I came to it, then you'd run it through soaking wet with a blanket, and then the blanket, it pushes the water out, but it also, the blanket is nice and wet. Okay. And I think that's the key.
Oh.
So sometimes I would wet my blankets and then wet paper. So you don't want to have it too wet. It's sort of like an optimum,
Of course.
Thing. And some paints I found, were different brands or colors work better than others. The problem with, I came across with Judy is that she would sometimes use gouache, which didn't transfer very well.
Oh.
So we had some losses. Yeah, and you can get some very, really beautiful aqueous kind of watercolory type of effects, but you can also get thick watercolor, pigment transferring too.
Huh. Impasto-y, sort of?
Sort of, yeah. So then once the watercolor dries, and you can just wrap it up and ship it. You could print it, a day later, you could print it a week later or a year later.
Is there any moment at which too much water will make the watercolor?
Yeah, it'll kind of push it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, another sort of creative way I worked with an artist not being in the studio. This was actually the precursor. This is pre-COVID, and that's what kind of led to figuring out these other COVID ways of collaboration. I started working with Jill Moser in probably 2018, I want to say. She actually came here. She had an idea for a print. She came here. We worked something up and an etching, and I think both of us were really feeling kind of ho-hum about it. Because I was just kind of like, I'm not sure if I really like this that much. So I kind of sat on it for a while, and eventually she called and said, let's talk about, that print. She said, I don't really like it that much. And I said, well, good, because neither do I. But she said, my work has recently gone through a big change, and I think we should forget about that and make some prints that are more related to, this new body of work that I'm working on. So I ended up going to New York with 6 or 8 copper plates in my suitcase and just went to her studio. I brought a little container of hard ground and some soap ground. And so the first day she worked on the hard ground, let it dry. I came back the next day and did some soap ground stuff, and I took it back here. And then, again, it was all remote from that point on. So all of the color proofing was done by phone, by FaceTime call, just conversations, talking about it. And she'd done enough prints with other print publishers that she knew, like the palette, like the Charbonnel palette, and knew about overprinting and color mixing and all that kind of stuff. So, it was an interesting experiment, I think, for her too. But the prints turned out really great, and they've been like good sellers too. We've sold like 2/3 of the edition at this point, I think.
Oh, wow.
And there were 6. There were 6 of them. So usually people buy them as a set. So it's really
nice. Fun. Even better.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so before you go into anything else, we've also, I don't think, ever uttered the words soap ground. And in my mind, there must be something about the bubbles, but must be similar to spit bite, right?
Well, only in that it allows you to get a brushed kind of mark. But what it is what I call it is a semi water soluble ground. So typically you'd have.
Oh, is it like a lift ground with the sugar?
No, because that's fully water soluble.
Oh, okay.
It lifts and then it's gone, right?
Okay.
Soap ground is a mixture of, it's basically paint. So you take titanium white pigment and linseed oil, and mix that, so that basically that's paint. And then you take powdered soap like ivory snow and mix that in. So you have this sort of like thick paste that's like half, there's a formula I have somewhere but then you take that and you add water to it. So it's sort of it's like an emulsion. It's both oil-based and water-based. Huh. Because the oil is bound up with the titanium white pigment, and the water is bound up with the soap. So then you paint it on to the plate, and you can then use it sort of like a little impasto-y and get like a brush stroke. Or you can make it kind of thin and aqueous and get kind of like a sort of more watercolory effect. But basically, the artist then puts it on the plate. It dries completely. Then you put an aqua tint over it, and then fusing the aqua tint. There's heat, and also just from drying, the oil polymerizes, right, and becomes like a tough kind of coating that wants to resist the water and the acid. But the soap is in there too, and it kind of wants to like absorb the water and the acid. So basically, the thin areas start etching first, because there's the least oil there that's resisting. And so the thinnest areas will become the darkest areas, and then the thicker areas become, lighter values or white, depending on, or unetched, basically, depending on how long you leave it in the acid. So a lot of it, it's sort of, it's a little tricky in terms of, like how thick you put it on.
Yeah.
But I just finished a project last month with Jason Karolak, and there are 2 4-plate etchings, and they're all the stuff is soap ground.
Okay, we're going to have to show some pictures and have some descriptive arrows pointing at the various parts because I'm confused. I think I know it when I see it, but I don't think I've ever really quite understood how it all comes together.
Well, I'm trying to think of examples that would be, people would know, but I can't think of any offhand.
Well, they're going to know Jason Kerouac.
Yeah, they're beautiful prints. Yeah,
I'm sure.
That's what I'm going to be printing like next month, I think. I call it white ground. Soap ground is
white ground. Oh gosh, white ground for the snowy ivory snow.
Yeah, it's white. Yeah,
yeah. Oh, and the titanium white, right?
Yeah.
Huh. That's one of the problems with terminology. There's lots of equivalents that I think people can get confused by.
Well, I think of it as like, hard ground is not water soluble. It's there. It's to block, the acid from getting to the copper.
Right.
Sugar lift is completely water soluble because it melts in the water and lifts up and exposes the part of the plate. And soap ground is like semi-permeable or semi-water soluble.
Somewhere in between. Can't you get the same effect with Sharpie? Thin layers of Sharpie versus sort of more worked layers of Sharpie as a block that...
Maybe. I haven't really done
much.
I think I played around with that a little bit in grad school, but I would think that it depends on the thickness, of your Sharpie.
Right. Sure.
And it's probably not as durable coating.
No, I would think not. I feel like I don't see much coming out of your shop that's black and white. You love the color.
Yeah, I do love the color. And also, I found, I don't know if it's true for other publishers, but people like color. It's easier to sell color prints.
Oh, I see.
Black and white print.
Pretty simple, people.
Especially lately. Yeah, I've been doing more color etching projects.
Right. And also the work out of your shop seems to be more on the abstract versus narrative, figurative.
Yeah, and I think that's really based on my personal taste.
Yeah, well, it would be. Right? That's why you're the curator of the shop.
Yeah, it's the stuff that I respond to and that I like.
Yeah.
And within that, I often look for if there's kind of a graphic quality, I guess, to the work. But definitely. I've been accused of being like anti-figurative.
J'accuse.
But it's just like that's what I like. So
yeah, well, that makes sense.
And also with you were talking about choosing an artist or criteria for like figuring out who. So I've got to like the work, but also just you have to like the artist too. You have to have a good relationship. So part of it is sensing, am I going to get along with this person? Like, will our personalities mesh? Not only in a working relationship, but it's a long-term relationship. If there are editions, it can take years to go, through an edition, and it's like it's a long-term relationship. And I always put a proviso in my publishing agreements that if at some point we both agree that we want to split, we can just split the remaining prints and be done with it. We go our separate ways, but it never happened.
Oh, really? You've never fired an artist?
No, but I also think I have a good sense of like who I would not get along with. So I avoid those people. But no, I feel really fortunate to really like almost all of the artists that I work with, and they like me.
Well, even more important. And Sarah, so in your business model, how do you sell? Are you dependent on internet sales? I know you do print fairs, but where do you sell more?
Well, it sort of has evolved. In the beginning, when I was working with Rupert Deese and Ted Kincaid, their galleries were supportive and wanted the prints. And so a lot of in the early years, the sales were through the artists' galleries. But that kind of started changing at some point. And I realized a lot of galleries don't want to work with like a third person. They just want to work with the artist. And if there's this publisher that's in the mix, that's less attractive to the gallery because it means they make, less money, right? Yeah, so 2008 is when I did my first art fair, which was a trial by fire because it was December of 2008 in Miami, when the economy was in free fall and it was just a complete disaster for everybody, I think, that year. But it was the very first time, and I was thinking, like, is this the way it always is, And it was an expensive fair, and I completely lost my shirt. And there have been a couple of others like that. But yeah, so basically, art fairs. Nowadays, I try to do three. Three a year is manageable. Sometimes, could throw a fourth one in. But then the other way is just I've kind of cultivated, because I don't get any foot traffic. I actually have a little gallery space in the front, but nobody ever comes here. Occasionally, someone from Chicago will come down. Most of the other artwork that's being sold in the galleries here, like in the community galleries, nothing's more than $200 or something. Rarely, So it's sort of like I'm not part of that, market. So I have to reach outside the community. And, thankfully, the internet makes that kind of easy. But I've also cultivated over the years, like a relationship with art consultants. They've been my lifeline. So a lot of the sales go through, those consultants, and a lot of them those are long-term relationships, and people keep coming back. And so, nowadays my strategy is when I have a new project, I will do an email blast, and social media posts associated with it, kind of try to build up some excitement and interest, and then do the email blast, a blog post on the website. And then on Artsy, you can put together a viewing room or an online exhibition. So you can use that to drive from social media to try to drive people, to that. And then, people can buy directly off of Artsy, or people get in touch with me. Yeah, at this point, it's, quarter century. I've been around long enough that, I think people know, who I am and what I do. So in some ways, I don't have to work that hard for it. But, the art fairs are hard. They're expensive, they're grueling, they're, very tiring. But I'm also happy that in the last few years, it took a long time to sort of navigate, like the whole art fair scene and figure out, like, what are the good art fairs? Like, what makes an art fair a good art fair? And, what makes one not so good? And, a lot of it was just trial and error and figuring out where I was supposed to be.
Which is different for everybody because, the audience, I have one person who came to Baltimore and said, I did so much better in Chicago. That's really clearly where my people are, which is fine, but just it's amazing how different regions of the country can shift what they're interested in and looking at.
But it's funny because, like the West Coast, they have Crown Point Press, they have Paulson Press, they've got Gemini and, the places in LA. And so there's kind of like big print culture there, but there's print fairs there. I actually did one print fair a few years ago there that was just like really, I won't say the name, but it was just not good at all for me. And so like the infrastructure for print-friendly art fairs, I'll say that, is sort of lacking, and at least in my estimation, on the West Coast. The Seattle Art Fair is kind of a big deal, and then there's some art fairs in San Francisco. But what I look for, Expo Chicago has been really good for me. It's a massive art fair. So within that fair, they have different sections. And one of them is a section called Edition. And it's for, prints, works on paper, and editions of various kinds. And the pricing for those booths is very competitive, very good. And so you're able to be in a subset of, like printmaking is kind of like a subgenre of the greater art world, and be next door to a booth that's selling paintings, and they're paying like $20,000 for their booth, and the booths for the edition section, they take into account that the price point of what you're selling, it's got to make sense to what you're paying for the booth. So I feel like I've cultivated a nice following in Chicago, and they've kept it going. I'm hoping now that Frieze has taken over Expo that they'll keep the model the same, because I think it works really well. Yeah, and then the other like recent thing for me is the IFPDA fair. So I was an invited exhibitor for the one this year in February, and now I'm in the process of becoming a member, and not quite there yet. It's kind of a very like an arcane, mysterious process, but I think I will be. But I'm going to be exhibiting at the 2025 fair.
Oh, are you? Good.
Yeah, so.
Well, that's great.
I won't be doing the Powerhouse.
That's okay.
Although kudos for doing that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, as we're recording this, it's August, so this will be old news by the time the episode drops, but we're starting a new fair, people. At Powerhouse Arts in Brooklyn, and it'll run at the same time as the IFPDA fair, so Print Week is back in New York, which is very exciting for all of us.
Yeah, well, there's definitely room for it with the demise of the EAB.
Exactly.
Which was, not without its own problems.
Well, sure, of course. Nothing's ever perfect, is it, Jonathan?
No, but I think it'll be good.
Yeah, I think it'll be good, too. People have never stopped talking about how there's a huge void because EAB shuttered. For people who don't know, EAB stands for Editions and Artists Books. It was a sister fair to, not sister as in real sister, but went on at the same time as the IFPDA fair, and it was for smaller, more emerging...
And all contemporary.
Yeah, and all contemporary.
The IFPDA was, historical.
That's true.
Contemporary.
Yeah, all contemporary. So we're trying to fill that void. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the IFPDA fair this year, it was a thrill. It was the first time that they had gone back to the Armory.
Right. It was mobbed.
Totally mobbed. I couldn't believe
mobbed.
People were saying they were waiting outside for like 2 hours.
I waited in the line to get in.
Yeah, and it was, just like the excitement for it. The fair itself looked fantastic. The space is a great space. And they really know how to do it. Like they hired a PR team and they got full-page article, not an ad, but an article in the New York Times for the fair. And yeah, it was really a great event. So I felt very fortunate to be there. And it also kind of felt like full circle somewhat because when I was first working for Manneken Press, we would go, we'd work on the prints all summer and then we'd bring them down to New York and we'd get them framed and then we'd help her set up the booth at the Armory, the IFPDA fair, which would always happen in like September or something. And yeah, I remember like going around and just like, I could get in free because I was an installer. I had a badge and so we'd just spend, like every day go up and really just carefully check everything out. And
right.
So yeah, it felt good to be like on the other end of that. So.
No, it was great to be back at the Armory. I mean, I didn't mind the Javits Center. The Armory's worth it for sure. Everybody seems very much happier.
Yeah, and just the excitement that it generated too was palpable. So
yeah,
of being back in their ancestral home.
Right. Yeah. So for listeners who have never made a trip to New York for the fairs, you'd need to do it. And in 2025, the two fairs that we are discussing will occur March 27th to 30th. And make your hotel reservations now.
And then I'm doing Ink Miami in December.
Oh, are you? Good.
So that's the next thing coming up.
Yeah, so Ink is a subset of IFPDA vendor, exhibitor people, and tell them about where the setup is. I assume it's in the same place.
Yeah, it's in the Suites of Dorchester.
Yes.
So it's on Collins Avenue in Miami Beach, right near the Convention Center and Art Basel and all that. Yeah, I'm hoping this will be the third time will be a charm. I've done two other fairs in Miami. One was the first time in 2008. I did the Aqua Fair.
Oh, okay.
And then that was a disaster. A few years after that, I did another one that was also a total disaster. But it's a hotel fair. So each exhibitor has a suite. And it's a nice hotel. I've been there. I've been to the fair there. Yeah, it seems very well curated. I think most of the people... It's actually not officially part of the IFPDA anymore. In fact, they decided not to support it.
Oh, okay.
And Stony Road Press and Tandem Press took it upon themselves to keep it running, and basically in the same format. So it sort of started off as an IFPDA kind of satellite fair, but is its own independent thing. But I think it has a great reputation.
Yeah, no, it's a good fair. It's small, which is nice because it's manageable after you come stumbling out of Art Basel. But it's the hotel is one of those old school motels. So there's this garden pathway, and each of the rooms is, it's super cool. It's worth seeing. All right. Well, is there anything we haven't talked about that we should? What's your most recent edition?
I'm finishing up editioning on a second Matt McGee project. So it's 3 more color aquatints. These ones are a little more, they're multiple plate, so they're a little more involved, similar scale, are on my website. They're also currently in a show. I don't think they're on the wall, but the gallery has them. Plant House Gallery has I think the show's still up. By the time this comes out.
It won't be, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm finishing up printing those editions. And then Jason Karolak, we have BATs. And then as soon as he left here, he had gotten an Albers Foundation grant and was going to the Albers Foundation studio residence in Senegal.
Nice.
So he's still there. So
wow.
I got the final BATs, and he's returning in about a week, I think, and mail them to him. And if those are kosher, then I'll launch into editioning those. And I'm trying to get one more project in before the end of the year. So
okay.
I have an invitation out to an artist that I haven't heard back from yet, and I have another standby artist. I'm hoping. So if that works out, that'll be okay. But
okay.
Yeah. So those are those are the new things. And then I'm hoping next year to do an edition instead of just monotypes with Anna Kunz.
Okay.
I've done 2 monotype projects with her.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, life is rolling along here at Manneken Press.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about the conversation we were going to be having over the last few days, and it struck me that I was just kind of thinking back to the timeline to try to have like a coherence, to everything. And it kind of struck me that I kind of feel like I'm only hitting my stride like right now.
Oh, wow.
And part of it, I think, was the first few years just getting the thing up and running, and then we started our family, so it's like having 3 kids over the course of 6 years, and being a parent, and it was slow. The first decade was like, it took a long time until my youngest got into all-day school, that I was really full-time focused on just this. And then somehow the last few years, like post-COVID, I feel like
oh, nice.
Things are going good and firing on all cylinders. And
nice. Wow. Well, welcome to the big time, I guess.
Such as it is.
So people can find you through your website, and you're active on the Insta. I don't know if you're on the Facebook.
Somewhat. Yeah, I'm less active on Facebook, more Instagram. I'm on Artsy. I'm on printededitions.com.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a blog on my website that's just talking about things that are happening here, or exhibitions that my artists are having, or
yeah. And I assume there's a place you can sign up for a newsletter or email blast thing.
Yes, to get the email blast.
Yeah.
And notifications of new blog posts. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I like the online print fairs. I think they're fun.
Yeah, and for somebody like me, who I don't have foot traffic, I don't have a brick and mortar gallery, really. The online art fairs, I haven't found have been so helpful, but things like Artsy and Printed Editions and First Dibs, they're another venue for people to see the work and discover, what you do and the artists that you work with.
Very cool. All right. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you, Jonathan. I haven't seen you in a bit, and glad to hear that everything is going so well.
Thank you. I'm glad it's going well, too.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for listening to this episode of Platemark with my guest, Jonathan Higgins. I always have fun talking to printers, and Jonathan was no different. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And, of course, a thank you to Jonathan for being a great guest. Thank yous also, as always, have to go to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for being my sound guy. Thank you, Dan. And to Michael Diamond for letting us use his original music. Thank you, Uncle Michael. Also, a thank you to Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for sending me studio sounds that I put together as the soundscape at the top and bottom of the episode. I want you all to remember to put on your calendar the Brooklyn Fine Art Print Fair, March 27 to 30 in 2025. It is part of New York Print Week. The IFPDA Print Fair will be running concurrently at the Armory on 67th and Park. You should make plans to be in New York for that Thursday through Sunday and make time to see both fairs. The print fair website for Brooklyn, which I am helping Luther Davis organize, is brooklynprintfair.org. It is being held at Powerhouse Arts in Gowanus. It's an incredible facility that holds the mission of helping artists make art. It's a fabrication center, and it has 2 print shops in it. Powerhouse Arts Print Shop, headed up by Luther Davis, and also Manneken Graphics just moved into the building. So Lisa Archigian is doing a great job of recreating the community spirit of the Manneken Graphics Art Center in Gowanus. So they've changed their name to MGC because the Manhattan thing is sort of confusing. In any case, both of those shops will be participating in the Brooklyn Fine Art Print Fair. You will see them together in a big booth. And, please make a plan to come on by. It's going to be awesome. As I said at the top, images that Jonathan and I talk about are over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com, and there's also a lot of other stuff over there, so go check it out. Leave me a review. It helps people find us. All right, we will see you next time.